book discussion, the five books that influenced me most in 2021. I've spoken many times about reading, the importance of reading, and why we think that reading is not just a pastime for hedge fund managers, but actually part of the job, because reading is conditioning of the mind, the same way that a mixed martial artist does pull-ups or push-ups, or she does a run here and there, or things like that. In a similar fashion, we read to condition our minds. It's Angus Fletcher has a theory about this. So this is not just us. It's not just our conjecture. I think there is some research, Ohio State, if you want to know more about it. I think the literature or the storytelling that we consume through reading is a lot more than just a pastime. And I don't want to go too much into details here. I can tell you that it works. I can tell you that it's effective, and I can not encourage people enough to really take this very seriously. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. That's why I'm talking about this. This is not a self-help podcast or anything like that. It is a very practical story about our fund, Orange Capital Partners. It's not meant to solicit any investors. It's just meant to give people I think a little bit of a sense. I think there's so many people out there that are contemplating or starting a hedge fund, getting into the risk business, working for a fund. And I think hopefully this podcast series, Not Even Wrong, can give people a bit of a sense. So this is going to be a review of the five most influential books of last year that we read. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's January 2nd, 2022. This is Crim Delco. We will have a reset, so we start this year from scratch. For 2021, we were up 33.3%. The market was up 26.9%, but we're outperforming by 8.4%. Now let's start with the books. Book number one, Barbarian Days by William Finnegan. Now, Barbarian Days is a biography by William Finnegan, who is a staff writer at the New Yorker. It's a surf story. It's a story about surfing, traveling, life in general. There's a couple of things I took from this book. First, the writing is just exceptional. It's a very nice flow. It's one of those books you just sort of immerse in. It's incredibly inspiring, but not very difficult to stomach. It's like light food, but very good food. If you hopefully you know what I mean. So it's not just some easy $20 novel or something like that. It is actually a very deep, profound book, but it's just written so well that it comes very lightly. I think one of the big inspiration I got from Finnegan is actually to start writing my own biography, which I did start writing. I have about 150 pages already. This will take a while. It's quite an endeavor, but he just inspired me to write about this. I think the other thing that I took from him is that I am a relatively novice surfer. Actually, I do bodyboarding, but when I talk about surfing here, I talk about bodyboarding when it pertains to me. But a lot of things are similar. The places I go surfing, California, the kinds of relationships I have with waves. So there's a lot of similarities here with Finnegan's book. Of course, it's not as sophisticated, and the surfing is not as hard and high end like his. But that's not the point at all. It doesn't matter. I'm not competing here. I just think that it's a very nice way to think about a particular theme, in this case surfing. It's one of those narrative techniques that Angus Fletcher talks about. So one way to talk about, let's say, the culture of Sumatra in Indonesia, which maybe is not the most interesting thing, but if you look at it through the lens of surfing, all of a sudden it can become very inspiring. So this narrative technique of picking something, let's say surfing, skiing, hiking, mountain biking, climbing, and then put it in the context of, let's say, cultural anthropological development of knowledge, or something along those lines. I think that's incredibly interesting. William Finnegan, Barbarian Days. The second book is The Science of Can and Can't by Chiara Marletto. Now, this is a very different type of book. This book is about physics. It's about a new frontier in physics. And the one thing that I got from Chiara, I think, is I understood very well what it means to generate knowledge and creativity. It is about counterfactuals. Counterfactuals are situations where there could be either 1 or 0. So whenever you have a situation where it could be the this or that, then we can gather information. So it could be this or that. And in that sense, creativity is none other than the exploration of these counterfactuals. And the faster we can explore, the faster we can error correct. And now this is Popper, this is Deutsch, so it all fits together. The faster we can gain knowledge, explanatory knowledge. So this to me is one of the biggest insights I had in 2021. It also leads me to another conclusion, which is, what is computation really about? Computation is the exploration of counterfactuals. And that's why computation is so crucial in disruption, because disruption, as we said many times in this podcast, is the exploration of counterfactuals. Disruption is the ability to very quickly see, okay, is it this or that? Is it this or that? Is it this or that? And then go and find better solutions for problems. Also gives a better light into what is actually mathematics. What is mathematics? It's a structural way to do computation, meaning you find shortcuts, you find things like constant formulas or numerical solutions, or you structure a certain process in a way so you can quicker do computation, which is just another way to say explore counterfactuals. So this to me was a very big insight in the science of canon content. It's still early days. I think I still have to kind of grasp what it actually means, but I feel like I'm on the right path. It also explains why companies that are able to take advantage of computation and Moore's law in that sense are so powerful. Of course, we know that already, but I think it's always incredibly helpful to look at the same thing from a different perspective and get more insight into a certain process. The third book is Lenin, the biography of Lenin. That is another great example of how you can take a probably pretty, let's call it, dry subject, the biography of the founder of Bolshevism. Sound very appealing at first sight, but I can tell you it's an incredibly well written book. Victor Sebastian wrote the book. He's one of those biographers, kind of like the Chernoff, the one who wrote Hamilton. That there's a skill to that. I think biographies are a skill like everything else, and I think that's another quote by Angus Fletcher, which is, there's no such thing as biographies, novels. It's all just stories. It's just marketing, and I think that's really true. What's the difference between a great novel and a great biography? Honestly, nothing. I mean, yeah, the one is supposed to be true, the other isn't, but who cares? It's more about the way you tell a story, and this is fantastically well done with Lenin. I think some of the takeaways from the Lenin biography, first and foremost, it's what Victor actually says in one of the preludes or YouTube videos recently about this book, which is the questions are still relevant. This is very astonishing if you think about it. The questions that Lenin raised are still relevant today. In fact, they're coming back, particularly now with the pandemic. So this would be one of the, I would say, maybe more sober insights, but still very important insight. I think the other thing is that it shows how a good idea can deteriorate very quickly into chaos. Now, for students of history, students of French Revolution and all these kinds of revolutions, this shouldn't be news. We've seen that several times before in life, in history of humankind, that when we change a system, we usually end up in a bad place before we get to a better place. Now, unfortunately, with Russia, this hasn't happened yet before, because I think it's also too short. The country didn't have the time to digest all of this and sort of propel itself into the new age of democracy and error correction a la Popper. But still, I think it's worth mentioning that we have sometimes these types of situations. And I think it's actually even more astonishing what happened in the United States, where we had a revolution, a civil war, and a win, and then an establishment of a country which is still around. What George Washington and Hamilton and these people did is astonishing in many ways. And one of the ways is that it didn't fall back into chaos like it did in the Soviet Union or whatever became after Tsar's Russia. And actually, yeah, it turned into the Soviet Union. So this, to me, certainly one of the biggest things I've learned. But there's a lot. This is the kind of book you read. It talks also about how hard it was for these people for decades to fight the Tsarist regime, and how decadent the Tsarist regime was to let this happen, to let this revolution happen, which is another, I would say, little anecdote you might want to think about today. Are we the frog that is boiling, or are we actually in a system that is anti-fragile? Where do we stand? I think for a lot of proponents, let's say, of the Bitcoin new monetary standard, they're always looking at it from the bright side, which is we have a new, better system. But a new system always means also victims, and the victims of this change of system, they could become very violent. So we have to keep that in mind, I think, when we talk about new systems, new paradigm shifts, revolutions, and those sort of things. The fourth book is Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. I think this book was overdue, but Mann is my favorite German writer, and Zauberberg, or the the Magic Mountain in English, is also takes place in my favorite place in the Alps, which is Davos. So of course this book was overdue. It's a big tome. It's a very deep intellectual book, typical Thomas Mann. So it takes time. I was ready to do it actually after I visited Davos this fall. So I did read it now. I'm very happy I did. It's one of those books that has so many facets and vectors and interesting things to talk about that it would be futile here to do this in a summary. I did a formal summary and several other episodes about the book, but here, within the context of this particular episode, I just want to say one particular thing, and this is that the question of reason and nature. I think that's the key, because this is also something that really influences the hedge fund industry a lot. Because we humans, we are somehow prone to try to avoid nature and overcome it with reason. That's a very recent innovation, started with the Enlightenment, and maybe before with the Greeks, but it's a very recent innovation in the history of humankind. Nevertheless, it's a great innovation, helped us a lot, helped us build Golden Gate bridges, computers, subdue nature. We can do a lot of things, ingenuity, engineering, a lot of things we can do with this type of thinking. However, we have to understand, particularly when we're in the business of wealth creation, that there are limits to that. The limits of reason, the same way Kant spoke about this, and many other philosophers, and actually Mann talks about this in his book, The Dialogue between Sant'Ambrini and the other person, the name eludes me right now, Nafta, which ends up in a tragic duel, actually. This controversy between Nafta and Sant'Ambrini, I think, is one of the key elements of the book. It's nature versus reason. Can reason subdue? There's a scene in the book where the author talks about Voltaire being upset at an earthquake in Lisbon. How dare nature do something like that? Reason doesn't allow that. Of course, this is absurd, and I don't know if it's true, but I could see how when people sort of, when you discover something like reason, this is like discovering acid or any kind, like hallucinative drugs. Reason is kind of like a hallucinative drug, which is kind of funny if you think about it. I'm calling reason a hallucinative drug when hallucination in our common day language is actually used for when we're not using reason. Anyway, to summarize this conversation about the Magic Mountain, and the takeaway that I got from that book is there is a dichotomy between reason and nature, and we have to continuously be aware of that, fight that. In the hedge fund business, we certainly are aware of that. We at Orange Capital Partners have said several times that embracing volatility is actually one of our main tasks and also one of the recipes for success in the hedge fund business. The last book I want to mention is The Black Cloud by Fred Hoyle. This is a book written in the, I believe, 50s or 60s of the last century. It's a science fiction book, and it's my first science fiction book, actually, if you don't count The Martian, which is kind of science fiction, but also, I would say, an adventure story. What is The Black Cloud? I think the reason I liked it is because it gave me a different perspective. I think very often in physics, or in general, when we talk about, let's say, aliens, we always think, oh, are there little green men on Mars and things like that, when in fact, life could come in many different versions. And in this particular book, life comes across in gaseous form. And there's a quote in the book which says that, oh, you species on Earth, so this thing that we encounter, Earth encounters, is in gaseous form. It's a cloud. And it says, oh, you guys are, you have such a bad form because you are subject to gravity, and that occupies so much of your existence. And it just makes you think that that's actually true. Gravity is one of the biggest sort of drawbacks of our existence, but also our advantage relative to, let's say, other forms of existence. And I think when you read a book like that, it is crucial
to, I think, to take away the perspective of things, because to me that's what science fiction really helps you do. It's not like predicting the future or anything like that. It is the perspective and the behavioral implications of that perspective, and this is very well done in that book. So to summarize, the five books that influenced me most in 2021 are Barbarian Days, The Magic Mountain, The Black Cloud, The Science of Can and Can't, and The Biography of Lenin. Thank you.